During August 16, 1944's morning, SS-Oberstgruppenführer Paul Hauser grasped paper that contradicted physics principles. He positioned himself within a humid concrete shelter beside Fontaine-le-Pin village. Beyond, the heavens appeared gray and oppressive. Within, the atmosphere reeked of old tobacco and dread. Hauser had reached 64 years. People named him Papa. He fathered the Waffen-SS. Someone who'd sacrificed his right eye from a Russian shell piece beyond Moscow during 1941. He represented a Prussian commander from the traditional academy, regimented, forceful, and completely faithful toward his commands. Yet the command he grasped, relayed straight from Wolf's lair, nearly 1,000 miles distant, embodied madness. Maintain position, it stated. The 7th Army won't withdraw. It shall counterattack. Hauser examined the chart table. The truth upon the acetate covering represented a fatal verdict. He directed the German 7th Army. Theoretically, this constituted a frightening strength of 100,000 soldiers and the leftovers of 4 panzer formations. Yet actually, they remained confined within a trap scarcely 15 miles broad and 9 miles thick. Toward the north, the Canadians hammered downward towards Troon. Toward the south, the Americans from the 15th Corps pushed upward from Argentan. Toward the east, the retaliatory Polish 1st Armored Division closed the sole escape. Hauser calculated the numbers. He possessed 100,000 soldiers, he possessed thousands of transports, and he possessed precisely one principal route and 3 dirt paths for extracting them. Should he follow Hitler, his force would perish where it remained. Should he disobey and command a withdrawal, he must push an entire force through a gap thinner than a city street while receiving fire from 3 directions. Hauser crushed the message. He executed the sole choice a logical warrior could execute. He commanded the withdrawal. "We advance tonight," he informed his personnel. "We must achieve the Dives River before sunrise." The withdrawal commenced amid a downpour of precipitation. During August 17th's afternoon, the routes approaching the municipality of Chamboise became a gridlock of the condemned. This represented the Wehrmacht's truth in 1944, removed of its propaganda shine. Beside the intimidating 60-ton Tiger II tanks from the 503rd Heavy Panzer Battalion, there existed thousands of horse-pulled carts. The German force was a strange combination. A 20th century armored skull fastened onto a 19th century supply torso. Terror was starting to emerge. The soldiers of the 277th Infantry Division were drained, their footwear decomposing upon their feet. They walked with their vision locked upon the heavens, petrified of the Jarbos, the Allied fighter bombers that dominated the sunlight. Every instant an engine sounded above. The whole formation would halt. Thousands of soldiers plunging into the bushes. Major Hans von Luck, a leader within the 21st Panzer Division, operated up and down the formation in his Kubelwagen, yelling commands, attempting to divide the tanks from the animals, attempting to maintain the circulation flowing through the trap's veins. "Continue advancing," he yelled. "Should we halt, we perish." The strain was tangible. You could detect it. Perspiration, damp fabric, heated lubricant, and animal waste. They awaited the aerial assault. They awaited the shriek of missiles. Yet 10 miles distant, within the Fire Direction Center, FDC of the 15th Corps, there existed no filth, there existed no yelling, there existed solely the silent, systematic labor of computation. This represented the frigid aspect of the conflict. American firepower wasn't an artistic expression, it was an industrial procedure. Within a big canvas shelter, lines of soldiers sat at drawing desks. They weren't fighters in the conventional meaning. They were bookkeepers of devastation. They dressed clean garments. They consumed hot beverages. They utilized slide calculators and logarithm charts. While Hauser was yelling at his tank leaders to evacuate a crossing, an American lieutenant named Parker was quietly charting positions on a matrix. Target Zone 44 Bravo, Parker spoke into a phone. Intersection east of Chambois. Gathering of enemy vehicles. He didn't peer out a pane. He didn't observe the opponent. He solely observed figures. Azimuth 4200 mils. Elevation 380 Targe 5 port. The American method had resolved the greatest challenge of firepower, duration. In the German army, each unit determined its individual firing information. It was prolonged. It was individual. In the American army, the FDC consolidated everything. One mind governed 100 weapons. They approached the combat zone like a manufacturing space. The German fighters were simply basic resources to be handled, and the apparatus was ravenous. Every day, the Red Ball Express, a perpetual transport belt of vehicles, supplied 20,000 tons of materials to the battlefront. For every projectile Hauser's tanks launched, the Americans could launch 50, but quantity wasn't the instrument. The instrument was coordination. What Lieutenant Parker and his squad were organizing was a technique called time on target, TOT. This is the instant where the conflict transformed from a competition of determination to a physics challenge. To comprehend why Hauser's force was fated, you must comprehend the calculations of immediate merging. Here is the challenge with conventional firepower. Battery A launches. The projectile flies for 30 seconds. Boom. The opponent hears the detonation. They understand they are receiving assault. They jump into trenches. They seal up their vehicles. Battery B launches 10 seconds afterward. Boom. Yet by now the opponent is protected beneath. The shock is forfeited. The destruction capability decreases by 90% following the initial projectile. General Hauser understood this. His professionals understood this. They relied on that 10-second interval of endurance. It was the cadence of their existence. The Americans chose to eliminate the interval. Within the FDC shelter, Parker retrieved 3 distinct firing charts stained with beverage marks. He was functioning backward from a particular instant in duration. The inquiry wasn't, when should we launch? It was, when must each weapon launch so everything lands concurrently? Battery A, 155 millimeters long. Tom situated at grid 2 November. Separation 12.4 miles from objective. Travel duration of a 155 millimeter projectile at that separation, considering muzzle speed of 2,800 feet per second, atmosphere opposition factor, and trajectory arc. 48 seconds precisely. Battery B 105 millimeter cannons situated at grid 31. Charlie, separation 4.3 miles from objective. Travel duration of a 105 millimeter projectile, 18 seconds precisely. Battery C, 8-inch massive weapons situated at grid 44 Delta. Separation 8.1 miles from objective. Travel duration of an 8-inch projectile, 35 seconds precisely. If all 3 batteries launched at the identical instant, the projectiles would land sequentially. Worthless. 18 seconds separated. The opponent would hear the initial, respond, and endure the subsequent and third. Yet if the FDC issued exact launching moments, determined backward from a particular collision instant, let's designate it 1400 hours, then the merging became achievable. Parker performed the computations. Battery A must launch at 13:59:12:12 to land at 14,000 Dauri. Battery C must launch at 13:59:25 to land at 14,000 Dauri. Battery B must launch at 13:59:20,2059. This demanded a coordination of timepieces that had never been tried in human chronicle. Every morning, American firepower commanders coordinated their wristwatches to the moment using the BBC duration transmission, or a central radio beat relayed from Corps Command. A variance of 2 seconds was regarded a malfunction. 2 seconds indicated a mistake radius of roughly 1,200 meters at the objective. Worthless. Yet the Americans had committed to exactness. Each firepower commander possessed a Belova or Elgin timepiece, coordinated to within 1 moment of nuclear duration. The custom was serious. At precisely 6 for the hours, the BBC transmitted the Greenwich Mean Time signals. Commanders held their timepieces to their hearing. They modified the moment needle portion by portion. The boundary for mistake was 1 beat, 1 pulse. This was the unseen calculations of American exactness. While Hauser contemplated in periods of tomorrow and subsequent week, The American FDC contemplated in periods of 1359.12 and 1359.25. Within the FDC shelter, Parker wasn't solitary. Surrounding him sat subordinate commanders with slide calculators, determining azimuth modifications for breeze, warmth modifications for tube growth, and ammunition variations. The 155mm long Tom could launch ammunition 3 through ammunition 7. Each ammunition alternative demanded its individual launching chart. Ammunition 5 produced 48 seconds travel duration. Ammunition 6 produced 44 seconds. Ammunition 7 produced 41 seconds. The FDC had to choose which mixture of ammunition and launching moments would merge on Objective 44 Bravo at precisely 1,400 hours. It was a three-dimensional riddle, not simply separation, not simply duration, but the perpendicular measurement as well. The projectiles had to land not simply at the identical instant, but at the identical height, forming a pyramid of devastation that no fighter could evade. Yet there existed something additional. Parker wasn't determining, not presently, he was determining where to launch next following this bombardment and the bombardment following that. Because the TOT wasn't a single-time technique. It was a procedure, a cadence. The concept was groundbreaking. Instead of persistent bombardment, utilize regular TOT salvos. Launch once, refill, pause 5 minutes, launch again. At a separate matrix section with a separate merging duration, the opponent couldn't entrench, couldn't strengthen, couldn't anticipate. They could solely observe their matrix section and wish. In the adjacent shelter, Major Williams was examining the munition provision channel. How many projectiles could 15th Corps maintain? The Red Bull Express supplied 20,000 tons per day to the battlefront. Of that, 8,000 tons were munition. Of that, 3,000 tons were firepower missiles. That was 30,000 separate projectiles per day, presuming a typical mass of 100 pounds per projectile. If the TOT approach demanded 3 bombardments per hour with 300 projectiles per bombardment, that was 900 projectiles per hour, or 21,600 projectiles per hour, or 21,600 projectiles per day, within the provisionability, more than adequate. While Hauser was yelling at his tank leaders to evacuate a crossing, an American lieutenant named Parker was quietly refreshing a supply data sheet. Projectiles on possession, 47,000. Projectiles on the Red Ball Express, 18,000. Projectiles in manufacturing at homeland plants, boundless. Hauser's operational challenge, how do I transport my soldiers through that opening? Parker's tactical challenge, how do I ensure no soldiers transport through that opening? Hauser was considering battalion dimension, battalion actions, company strategies, platoon dimension, persistence. Parker was considering arrangement dimension, manufacturing timetables, supply networks, merging paths, and fatality percentages. One soldier with a wireless transmitter, one soldier with a slide calculator, both attempting to resolve the identical challenge, but from contrary terminals of the conflict. Hauser would fail because his challenge was unachievable. He had 100,000 soldiers in a 15-mile trap with solely one departure. Parker would succeed because his challenge was already resolved. He had 48 weapons, 300 munition vehicles, and a timepiece coordinated to the BBC. What Hauser didn't understand was that this wasn't even the commencement. This was simply the firepower. Beyond the firepower was the Air Force. Beyond the Air Force was the Navy. Beyond the Navy was Detroit. The 7th Army was confronting more than 15th Corps. It was confronting the whole American industrial arrangement. And that arrangement had chosen that the Falaise trap would stop existing by August 21st. When the directive launch was issued, it didn't resemble a film. It wasn't a concurrent thunder. It was a regular, bewildering wave of sound across the terrain. To a German watcher on a slope, it would seem idle. A crack here, a bang there. Yet up in the atmosphere, something horrible was occurring. Hundreds of metal missiles, measuring between 30 and 200 pounds each, were merging in a three-dimensional pyramid. They were flying at faster than sound velocities. They were surpassing their individual sound. Back on the route beside Troon, Paul Hauser cleaned precipitation from his functional eye. It was silent, too silent. The Jarbos had departed home due to the climate. He observed a formation of his soldiers, stopped at a junction, consuming cold provisions. They were calm. They hadn't detected a launching weapon for minutes. There was no whistle of approaching projectiles. That's the science of faster-than-sound travel. The projectile lands before the noise. Hauser examined his timepiece. It was 1400 hours. In one moment, genuinely one single moment, 3,000 projectiles struck the junction. It wasn't a bombardment. It was an elimination. The science of a time-on-target attack creates an excess pressure surge that functions like a firm mallet. The atmosphere itself transformed into an instrument. Within the objective area, the compression spiked so violently that respiratory organs burst immediately. Hearing organs were destroyed. The interval of persistence that Hauser trusted on did not occur. There was no duration to jump. There was no duration to scream. One instant, a fighter was consuming bread. The subsequent instant, he was simply absent. And then arrived the subsequent breakthrough, the VT mechanism. For years, firepower projectiles detonated when they contacted the surface. If you were in a trench, you were protected. Yet American researchers at Johns Hopkins University had positioned tiny wireless detectors within the tip of their projectiles. These variable time mechanisms detected the surface and triggered the projectile precisely 30 feet in the atmosphere. Hauser observed in terror as the woodland surrounding him transformed into a shredder. The projectiles didn't contact the filth. They detonated overhead, pouring irregular metal straight downward. The trenches transformed into exposed tombs. The ditches transformed into snares. The powerful Tiger vehicles with their robust forward protection were worthless against 155mm projectiles detonating straight above their motor compartments. The cooling systems were destroyed. The personnel was stunned by the impact surges ringing the vehicles like chimes. The terror was total. This was metal madness. Professionals of the Eastern Front, soldiers who had battled in the wreckage of Stalingrad, collapsed and sobbed. They could battle an opponent. They could observe. They could battle a vehicle. Yet they couldn't battle calculations. The route to Chamwa transformed into known as the Corridor of Death. It was no longer a withdrawal. It was a massacre. Operators abandoned their vehicles and fled blindly into the grasslands solely to be eliminated by the subsequent tot salvo. Animals, crazed by the sound and metal fragments, rushed through the formations, pulverizing the river. Dives flowed crimson, genuinely crimson, with the fluid of the 7th Army. 10 miles distant, the American shooters were perspiring, removing to the torso. They were launching so rapidly the coating was flaking off the tubes of their cannons. Halt launch, the wireless crackled. Tube temperatures dangerous. Continue launching, arrived the directive from the FDC. Discharge it on. Vehicles from the Red Ball Express were reversing up straight to the weapon positions, unloading fresh containers of ammunition. They didn't even attempt to arrange them. They simply scooped them into the openings. In 24 hours, the 15th Corps launched 80,000 rounds into a zone the dimension of Central Park. It was the greatest density of firepower discharge in the chronicle of combat. On August 20th, the mathematical unavoidable overtook Paul Hauser. He was advancing with the leftovers of his personnel beside the shores of the dives, attempting to arrange escape with the 1st SS Panzer Division. He was on foot, or possibly in an exposed transport. Accounts differ. He was attempting to be a fighter. He was attempting to guide. Yet the American FDC didn't concern about his position. They solely concerned about his matrix section. Target 55 Charlie. Time on target 16:35:00. The atmosphere divided open. A fragment of metal, heated and irregular, ripped through Hauser's visage. It demolished his mandible and embedded in his shoulder. The commander-in-chief of the 7th Army descended in the filth, incapable to deliver commands, incapable to articulate, hemorrhaging into the identical ground as his poorest private. Surrounding him, his personnel was obliterated. Hauser was dragged onto the rear of a vehicle, some claim a Stoogie-3 assault weapon, and secured down like a fragment of baggage. As he drifted in and out of awareness, gazing up at the gray heavens, he witnessed the termination of the Third Reich. He wasn't witnessing a loss in combat. He was witnessing an insolvency action. Germany was insolvent of metal, insolvent of petroleum, and insolvent of duration. He was transported out of the trap, a shattered soldier departing behind a shattered force. By the instant the launching ceased on August 21, the 7th Army had stopped existing as a combat strength. 10,000 soldiers lay deceased in the passage. 50,000 capitulated, walking in limitless gray formations towards yet the equipment failure was the genuine judgment. 500 vehicles and assault weapons demolished, 7,000 vehicles abandoned, and 20,000 animals. Their swollen bodies saturating the atmosphere with an odor that aviators claimed they could detect from 2,000 feet. When General Eisenhower visited the combat zone 2 days afterward, he was noticeably disturbed. He documented in his recollections, it was genuinely achievable to traverse for hundreds of yards at an instance, stepping on nothing but deceased and decomposing tissue. The Falaise Pocket was not a combat, it was an industrial termination. Paul Hauser endured his injuries. He existed until 1972. He documented recollections. He protected the standing of his forces, yet he never genuinely departed the passage of death. In his confidential instances, he surely grasped the instruction that had been seared into him that day. The German force had wagered everything on the idea of the Übermensch, the exceptional fighter, the exceptional determination, the exceptional operational brilliance. They trusted that combat energy could conquer equipment weakness. Yet on August 20th, 1944, the United States Army demonstrated them incorrect. They didn't defeat Hauser with superior strategies. They didn't surround him with genius. They defeated him with a slide calculator. They defeated him with a supply network that extended from Detroit to Normandy. They defeated him with arrangement that could supply 3,000 projectiles to a single location in space and duration without a moment of doubt. The time-on-target bombardment was the maximum representation of the American method of conflict. Detached, analytical, and completely crushing. Hauser discovered, at the expense of his force and his individual fluid, that in the period of industrial combat, bravery is simply a component in a science formula. And against the calculations of the U.S. Army, the worth of that component was zero.